When independence became my strength. 9 years after my parents refused to help sitting at the kitchen table, I stared at the crisp letter in my hands. The bold print on the top read, "Congratulations," a word I'd been dreaming of for months. I had been accepted into my dream university, Columbia. The joy was overwhelming, the culmination of years of hard work, late-night study sessions, and sacrifices. But as I sat there, excitement bubbling up inside me, I couldn't help but notice the tension in the room. My parents sat across from me. My mother's face was stoic, and my father's eyes were unreadable. I expected pride, perhaps a smile or a warm hug. I expected a moment of shared excitement. Instead, there was silence, and in that silence, my heart sank a little. "We're proud of you, Sophia," my mother finally said, her voice calm and measured. "But we're not going to pay for your college." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. The room felt like it was closing in around me, and my vision blurred as I tried to process her words. "What do you mean you're not paying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father cleared his throat, setting his coffee cup down with a soft clink. "Sophia, you're an adult now. You need to learn how to be independent," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Independent?" I repeated, feeling the familiar sting of tears threatening to spill. "But this is Columbia. This is my dream school. I've worked so hard." "We know," my mother replied, her tone softening only slightly. "But we've decided it's time for you to learn responsibility. We had to put ourselves through school. We didn't have anyone to fall back on." The words cut deeper than they knew. My friends' parents were thrilled about their children going to college, some even bragging about paying for everything, giving them a head start in life. Yet here I was, standing on the precipice of my future, and my parents were pulling the safety net right out from under me. "But you can afford to help," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I'm not asking for a free ride." My father shook his head. "You'll figure it out, Sophia. You'll get loans, find scholarships, maybe get a part-time job. This is how you learn to stand on your own 2 feet." There was no arguing with them. Their decision was final. And as I left the kitchen that day, the acceptance letter that had once felt like a ticket to my future now felt like a cruel joke. The weeks that followed were filled with a whirlwind of applications for loans, for scholarships, for anything that would help me scrape together enough money to afford even a semester at Columbia. Every rejection letter felt like another slap in the face, a reminder that the world wasn't going to help me any more than my parents were. But I was determined. I worked 2 jobs, one at a local cafe during the day, and another as a server at a restaurant in the evenings. My weekends were consumed by tutoring high school students to make extra money. I barely slept, and there were days when I felt like I was running on fumes, but I had no choice. If I wanted that degree, if I wanted to prove to myself and my parents that I could do it, I had to keep going. There were moments when I resented them deeply, moments when I saw my friends enjoying college life, going on spring break trips, and attending parties, while I was stuck working or studying. They had parents who supported them, who made their lives easier. My parents didn't even offer to co-sign my loans. I stopped calling home as often. Every time I did, the conversations were short, stilted, and filled with awkward silences. My mother would occasionally ask, "How are your studies?" but never asked if I needed help. My father, when we spoke, would just remind me that this was all part of growing up. But I was growing up, faster than I ever imagined. I learned to budget every cent, to stretch a paycheck until it felt like I was performing a magic trick. I learned to thrive on 4 hours of sleep, to manage a workload that seemed impossible, and to face the reality that I was on my own. 4 years later, I stood at my graduation, looking out at the sea of proud parents in the audience. They were taking pictures, cheering for their children as they walked across the stage. I searched for my parents' faces, knowing they wouldn't be there. They hadn't come. I hadn't expected them to. I shook hands with the dean,
accepted my diploma with honors, and smiled for the cameras. But inside, I felt a hollowness that I couldn't quite shake. I had achieved everything I set out to do, but my parents' absence left a void that even my success couldn't fill. Years passed, and life began to take on a different rhythm. After graduation, I landed a job at a tech company in New York, working my way up from a low-level position to a project manager within a few years.
The long hours and stress from college had prepared me well for the demands of corporate life, and I thrived. Promotions came steadily, and my salary grew to match the effort I put into my work. By the time I turned 27, I was living in a sleek apartment in Manhattan, financially stable in a way I had never been before. My parents and I had settled into a distant relationship, cordial but strained. They never asked about my job, and I never told them much. It felt like a quiet, unspoken agreement to keep things light and impersonal. One evening, as I was wrapping up a late-night project, my phone buzzed. It was a call from my mother. She rarely called, and when she did, it was usually for something mundane. But this time, her voice sounded different, nervous, maybe even vulnerable. "Sophia, your father and I need to talk to you," she said after a brief hello. "Can you come to the house this weekend?" I was taken aback. My parents had never asked me to come home for a talk before. Curiosity, and a hint of concern, made me agree. That weekend, I drove back to the house I had grown up in, a house that now felt more like a stranger's home than my own. My mother greeted me at the door, her face etched with worry. My father sat in the living room, his usually composed demeanor replaced with something more fragile. "Thank you for coming," my father said, motioning for me to sit. I sat across from them, unsure of what to expect. My mother cleared her throat, wringing her hands in a way I had never seen before. "Sophia, we're in trouble," she began softly. My heart raced. I couldn't remember the last time my mother had sounded so unsure of herself. "The business. It's failing," my father said quietly. "We made some bad investments, and now we're in debt. A lot of debt." I stared at them, not fully understanding. My parents had always been so proud of their financial independence, of the life they had built. They had never once asked for help. But now, here they were, asking me. "We're hoping if you could help us out," my mother said, her voice almost pleading. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. 9 years ago, they had refused to help me when I needed them most. They had forced me to learn independence in the hardest way possible. And now, after all these years, they were the ones asking for my help. For a moment, I considered saying no. I considered reminding them of the nights I spent crying in frustration, the endless hours I worked just to make it through school, the lack of support when I needed it most. But as I looked at their faces, older, more worn than I remembered, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to them. "I'll help you," I said finally, my voice calm. "But I want you to know that I didn't need your help to get where I am. I did it all on my own." My parents nodded, and for the first time in years, I saw something in their eyes that I hadn't seen before. Pride. 9 years ago, my parents refused to pay for my education, believing it would teach me independence. In the end, they were right. But what they didn't realize was that I had also learned something far more valuable: how to forgive, how to rise above, and how to be better than the lessons they tried to teach. And as I walked out of their house that day, I knew that I had finally let go of the past. When Sophia's parents refused to pay for her college education, insisting she should learn to be independent, her world was turned upside down. Forced to navigate the challenges of life on her own, Sophia worked tirelessly to achieve her dreams. 9 years later, as a successful professional, she is faced with a surprising twist. Her parents now need her help. In this emotional and empowering story, Sophia must confront the past and decide whether to help the very people who abandoned her when she needed them most.